Hunter Roberts Construction Group started about 13 years ago, and we have been a prominent leader in building life sciences essentially since we started. We successfully completed a number of the projects that were mentioned here: BioBat, the New York Genome Center, and most recently the New York Stem Cell. We've also done extensive healthcare and laboratories throughout for just about every institution in New York City. We're really looking forward to this pretty awesome session with these entrepreneurs. If anybody knows a little background, we've heard some discussions early on about the different groups. Now, this fine group that we have made up here pretty much all started as startups in the incubator section here. And now they're established companies and established firms. So there's going to be some great insight as to how they are. So if the panelists would want to take the time now to introduce yourselves.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me? Great. Janel Anderson. I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Versant Ventures here in New York. Our office is in Chelsea. We start biotech companies, and I can rattle through those in a minute if you like. My background is that I'm a PhD chemist turned management consultant turned venture capitalist with a big stint in pharma in the middle of some of that. I've been with Versant about 9 months, and we're a global firm with $2.3 billion under management, and offices in San Francisco, New York, Basel, and a couple of other places around the world.
Hey everyone, my name is Blake Adair. I'm the Chief of Staff at Epibone. We are a biotechnology company that's based out of Brooklyn, and our focus is a more regenerative medicine focus and looking to create new products for the orthopedic market. So in that space, we're looking to make living, autologous, and personalized bone grafts and cartilage grafts for skeletal repair.
Hi, Will Canine, co-founder of Opentrons. We make robots that biologists use to run experiments. I don't know how many of you all have seen biotech going, but it involves a lot of pipetting. And you're either running your experiments by hand or you have like a $100,000 robot to do it for you. Our robots are $4,000. We're a Y Combinator, Coastal Venture-backed startup, 35 people in Dumbo, 20 people in Shenzhen, China. And we've been doubling every 6 months since we got started, and we're about to outgrow our current space.
And we were one of your first customers.
Indeed.
Hi, I'm Andras, Forgacs, co-founder and CEO of Modern Meadow. We're a company that's focused on making the next generation of biologically advanced materials for consumers. Our inspiration is leather. As many of you may know, leather is made of a protein. Its main biological ingredient is a protein called collagen. And we figured out a way to make collagen without requiring animals. And to be able to assemble this collagen in a whole range of material properties that give us incredible control over design, performance, and functionality. So if you think about it, we are integrating the capabilities of companies like Genentech with companies like Gore-Tex to create the materials that we make for customers like Gucci, right? Now, those are not specific companies that we're working with, but just to give you a reference on what we do. We were founded 6 years ago. We've raised over $60 million to date. We've got 75 people working in the company. We moved to New York 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, because in the early days we started in the Bay Area and we had labs in the Midwest. And for the kind of thing we do, which is about bringing biology, engineering together with design in the service of consumers, New York is really the center in the world for this, right? So we moved to New York for that reason. And we moved specifically to Brooklyn. We were one of the very first startup New York companies. We were based in BioBat at the time. And that was with 7 people when we made that move. And now that we're at 75, we outgrew that location. So last year, we actually had to expand. And we're now the very first company that moved on to Roche's former headquarters in Nutley, New Jersey. So that's where our main campus is, but we still preserved a Brooklyn location. So now we're in the Navy Yard, and that's where we have a design and applied research studio as part of New Lab. So happy to talk about real estate because that was a big factor in a lot of our growth planning as a company.
Well, I think that's a great place to start, right? Since this is a real estate symposium. So the questions I have, so as startups, your initial requirements for both commercial and manufacturing space, your needs, are very different than where they are today. You think about the future, we've heard a lot about how the future is expanding here. It could be exponentially, right? So with that, what do you predict your needs are? What do you see as the needs for your future?
So at Versant, we will, in the New York area, will plan to continue to build about a company a year and do that from scratch. Now, we always ask ourselves, aside from the space needs that we need, which are very modest and only office, we always ask ourselves, what do we need now? What are we growing to? And what type of space is it? We've had a New York presence for about 3 years, and we have 4 companies in that time with a presence here. And they're actually a very interesting mix of smaller amounts of lab space needed, larger amounts of lab space needed, and those are both in the Alexandria, for example. We have a smaller company in Launch Labs, which is more nascent, and we have one where the whole entire C-suite is here, but the R&D scientists are elsewhere in a different geography. And that works really well also. So those companies are really flourishing and will continue to do that. And it'll be case by case as we build each company what we need to be here, whether it's lab or office, and how that can best be met. I can dive into more detail if you want to know, for particular ones, how we started and how we grew, because we've already been through transitions with some of those companies, and so it goes, it continues. But what we often talk about is, of course, what's next, and where is the step-out space that we're going to take when we grow out of this. We have, 7,500 square feet right now, and we're going to grow to 20 people, and where are they going to go? And so this is always a topic of discussion. It's always on our mind. And we've not had a need yet to leave the city with these particular companies I was just talking about. But the time may come where we do. It'll all depend on what the needs are at the time, or what the facilities are at the time that we have the particular needs that we have. So we're projecting that, and we'll continue to do so with the new companies we start.
Well, to give kind of a little bit of history about where we're at with Epibone, we actually got our start. We had like 2 or 3 employees, and we started at the Harlem Biospace. But that quickly became too small for us to work out of, and so we moved to the Suny Downstate Incubator. So at the current moment, we have about 20 people and about 6,000 square feet. And so in the next 2 to 3 years, we're looking to move into a space that's about 15 to 20,000 square feet. But of course, that can change, and of course, as you mentioned, like the thought of leaving New York is always kind of like on our mind if we can't get the space, the flexibility, the affordability that we're looking for. So it's actually really great that I think the real estate community is really taking notice for this, and hopefully we can move forward together, hitting everybody's needs.
So we got our start at GenSpace, which is the biohacker space that Dan was talking about. And I think that a real key for Opentrons' success has always been cross-disciplinary pollination. We're combining mechanical engineers with backgrounds at places like MakerBot and other 3D printer places. We have, PhD scientists from Princeton and MD Anderson. We've got software engineers who worked on AI and robotics before. We've got marketing people who used to do things like direct-to-consumer, like Birchbox and Casper. So for us, specifically in our office space, we need a wet lab. We need a a prototyping shop with a laser cutter and 3D printers and soldering and stuff like that. And we need open office space for our sales team and our development team. And we're going to keep needing that just in larger and larger square footages as we continue to grow. And I don't think we're unique. I think that the thing that makes New York unique is being able to create these cross-disciplinary companies, and we're going to need a different kind of space than the more traditional life sciences companies need. And for us, it wouldn't really work to have the C-suite in a different place as the development team. And that's because there's not a playbook for how do you make an affordable robot that scientists use, right? And so we need the space to goof up and iteratively try things. And if you're not rubbing elbows with people every day, that becomes exponentially more difficult to do in a quick iterative cycle. So I think for us, making sure that we have, wetware, software, and hardware all under the same roof with business is going to be a key as we continue to grow.
I completely agree with that, and you heard also from Suzanne Lee, our Chief Creative Officer, that one of our big needs as a company is talent, and specifically, it's this interdisciplinary talent, this cognitive mix, this cognitive diversity that New York is so excellent about, where you're able to have world-class scientists and engineers work together alongside with world-class designers, and that's what makes our environment at Modern Meadow very special. It would be very difficult if we had one location for design or for the C-suite and a separate location for the R&D and the manufacturing. And we're trying to resist that as much as possible so we can maximize that cross-pollination. So we somewhat reluctantly made the move last year out of New York City because our needs were such that there's nothing in the city that satisfied that. Right now we have 73,000 square feet in New Jersey, just 10 miles from the Midtown Tunnel. It's about as close as we can get for that kind of asset. And we also have the opportunity to expand and build out a pilot manufacturing facility, which again, we want to have very close to our R&D. So you asked about what our real estate needs are. Specifically, one of our big moves is we're actually going to put steel in the ground and build out a pilot manufacturing facility, probably on the order of about 40,000 square feet or more. And that was a huge, complicated search and lease negotiation, and shout out to Bill Hartman at Cushman and Wakefield, who was patient with us in that process. I mean, what we literally did is we looked at where we were in the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and we drew a kind of a 1-hour radius around our current location and said, okay, where are all the dots of the facilities that could satisfy our needs, where we could accommodate our 70 employees and accommodate growth, for the next 200 that we're hiring? And where is the talent? What does the talent pool look like that we want to attract? And how do we prevent this company from fragmenting, where we have, the design in one side, the management in the other, and the R&D and the manufacturing elsewhere? So we really wanted to kind of keep everyone in one house. We didn't want the wheels on the bus to come off with, people feeling like their lifestyle or their commute is being altered too dramatically. And we're very fortunate to land where we did. But I would say we are incredibly committed to New York City. We moved here for a reason. We're incredibly committed to our presence in Brooklyn, in the Navy Yard. In fact, we're building out, that space and turning it into a design, an applied research studio. For us, our identity being a hybrid kind of Brooklyn, New Jersey company is an important part of our story and our experience. You get access to tremendous talent by being in the city, and you also get access to tremendous talent sometimes by being just across the river. Ideally, it shouldn't be that kind of choice, but we have to go to where the talent is and where the space is.
So, Andras, we talked a little earlier. As I mentioned, Hunt and Roberts were only 13 years old, so at one time we were a startup, and we did feel it. But, as a startup, you're constantly challenged with costs, right? So how does the costs relate to all of your businesses, both starting up and now where you're full-fledged companies, but still looking at all the growth?
Yeah, I mean, it was not a cost decision alone, let's say, right, that led us to Nutley, New Jersey. Although this campus is amazing, right? Roche spared no expense in building it out. The building that we moved into happens to be the original Roche Institute of Molecular Biology building. That's kind of like saying Bell Labs, right, in the biotech industry. And it's newly renovated. Roche put $90 million into that building 4 or 5 years ago and barely occupied it before they sold the campus. So we feel very fortunate to be there next to a medical school that's opening. But look, it's inescapable that we are paying probably a fraction of what we would pay if we were looking for space in Manhattan. And because of this, the square footage needs that we have, because we're a manufacturer, we are looking to ultimately have over 100,000 square feet, and that just becomes very difficult. Let's say we were to commit to, in an alternative scenario, if we had stayed, let's say, in Brooklyn, and if we had built out our space in Industry City or somewhere else, and fast forward 5 years from now, we're really successful and we need another 40,000 square feet. One of my fears was, gosh, what happens if a certain cluster gets really built out to capacity and then we realize we need to double? And then it becomes a real challenge about how do you assemble that patchwork of available real estate, or how do you contend with higher real estate costs to really build out your, the capacity that you would need. We don't have that challenge now. We have room to grow. And then another factor, look, this is not decisive, but you have to put it into the mix, is incentives. New York State was very generous with us. We're still a startup New York company. New York worked really hard to keep our growth in the state. But New Jersey also worked very hard for that, and they have a very good program called Grow New Jersey, and we were the generous recipient of tax credits, $32 million worth of tax credits to move into this facility. So cost is a part of the equation. Now you have to realize, ultimately, this is about R&D. It's about small-scale production in the interest of development, scale up. It's not about at-scale manufacturing. For us, you don't do that. You don't do world-scale manufacturing 10 miles from New York City. You do that, you're there for the talent, for the R&D, for the innovation, for really developing the manufacturing process of the future. But at world scale, when we are actually shipping, our materials by the hundreds of thousands or millions of square feet, that is probably something that we would do to be more integrated with the supply chains of our partners, with the companies that we serve, whether it's in fashion, luxury, sport, automotive, what have you. And that'll be a global question.
So I think the way that I would frame the question about startups and costs, you've heard hopefully the lean startup concept, especially as it applies to software. And we're starting to see, believe it or not, lean biotech startups. And that is because of spaces like GenSpace, where you can pay $200 a month and get access to the life science equipment that you need. It's also because of places like IndieBio and Y Combinator that will invest in idea stage companies and give you lab space to see if your idea even works or not. And I think that, you hear about the garage startups in software. Can't really do a garage startup in biotech. You need a GenSpace or some kind of lab facility to use. And I think that, all the ideas that turn into big multi-billion-dollar companies sounded crazy when they got started. And if you don't have the infrastructure for people with $0 in their pocket to try out an idea, you won't see those big companies that really cross boundaries in biotech. So I think that keeping costs very, very low for very early stage companies is an essential part of the innovation ecosystem, and we need to see it move into the life sciences in the same way that it's now pervasive in software.
I guess I would just piggyback on what you guys have said about needing to run a lean startup. It is actually very pivotally important, especially for a company like ours. Just because the nature of life sciences, that is very capital intensive, it has very lengthy times to market, or at least in our case it does. So that really requires us to stretch our investor dollars, and that means taking advantage of those tax credits. It means applying for grants from the NIH, the Department of Defense, anyone who will give us free money, basically. So really making sure we're taking advantage of that, and that requires a lot of time, effort, capability to do that. So like you guys mentioned, just keeping your rent costs very low is huge for us, and we are kind of in a weird space right now where we have been taking advantage of that, and we are in a place that is actually very affordable. However, the distance of where we're at from the city center has kind of affected us in several different ways, and so we are seeing the effect of that and are now actively considering moving back into the city, that even though it would increase our rents, will definitely increase our ability to network.
Right, but ultimately your most expensive part of your cost equation is your talent. right? So your ability to acquire the best talent and to retain the best talent and to get the most efficiency out of your talent, is a part of the math, right? So it can't just be about lowest cost real estate at all cost. But if you can get both, obviously, that's the magic. Right?
Absolutely, and you would actually think, and to your point, I think that it could be a problem for us later on. So right now, it hasn't been a problem for us getting the talent that we need, even though we're kind of in a remote location. But as we look for more specialized talent, we're going to be looking to New Jersey. We're going to be looking to different areas of the city, which could make that a little bit more difficult. So right now, where we feel that distance is definitely in being a part of the life science community and being able to develop the investor relationships that we're looking to have. But talent is definitely an important part of that.
Janelle, so you're a scientist now and also on the venture capital side. So I'm sure you do a lot of coaching, planning, and predicting for your clients and customers here. So what's your perspective on this?
Right, well, I think that it's important to highlight that this panel is a really interesting cross-section of life sciences, right? And actually, we have very different needs in some ways. Mm-hmm. So it's true, I'm sitting on the venture capital side, but we have, dozens of portfolio companies at Versant Ventures, but in particular in New York, I highlighted 4 of them. And they themselves have different needs, as I was saying. But even up here, you mentioned talent, Andras, and that's very true. Real estate will, as we all know, will take a big chunk out of your venture-backed dollars, which you want to go as far as possible. But I think on this side of the panel, we're on the side of the spectrum where once you get into the clinic, because we're trying to make drugs and internal devices, I guess. I don't know how you're exactly classified at Epibone, but those take incredible amounts of capital to get through trials, as well as time and so forth. And so what's really interesting from my perspective in doing biotech venture capital, because most of what we do is biotech where the end of the line for our companies is meant to be, not end of the line, but the objective of our companies is meant to be a drug, or hopefully several, is that we know where the major cost buckets are. We'd rather real estate was not number one because of some of the other major ones, and we'd like to invest in talent, and we know we're going to need to invest in enormous amounts in science that increases every year you get on. But what's interesting is that in our ecosystem of starting biotech companies from scratch, we don't actually normally think to when are we going to need 70,000 square feet. And that's because as venture capitalists, we're setting up the companies, we're launching them, we want to get them to a certain stage, and then we're going to IPO them, or we're going to hope that they're acquired by a pharma company. Those are the usual paths to liquidation for us, for the company. And so at that point, that company is, like, you think of it as you have a child and you send the child off to college, and now they're on their own. And that company can go wherever they need to go and do whatever they need to do. They're self-encapsulated, if you will. Well, they're under our care as an investor and the founder, in some cases, of our companies. We only have to think a certain distance ahead, and it rarely includes we're going to build our own manufacturing plant. And no more often does it include we're going to build our own hospital so we can do clinical trials in-house. That never happens. So we don't have to worry about real estate on that scale. We're much more worried about the cost and the space and the very particular needs over the next number of years, knowing that we're going to outsource manufacturing and we're going to outsource clinical trials, and we can even outsource R&D to a large extent if we want to.
And Janelle, it's a really good point because you guys are on the therapeutic side of the panel here, and so for you, it's incredibly important to be near academic medical centers, to be, in certain clusters within the city that are actually very, very strong and very unique. We're on the more of the industrial side of the equation, and for us, we are makers, right? We're kind of companies that are. For us, space is important, the ability to scale manufacturing is important, and there are certain parts of our technology stack that we can outsource, right? So part of our business is based on fermentation, right, where we grow microorganisms to produce the collagen. That we don't need to build. There's lots of fermentation capacity around the world. We can partner on that. But our big innovation is a manufacturing innovation, right? And we can't go out to a toller and simply say, hey, we've come up with a manufacturing innovation, because that technology, that manufacturing technology, does not exist at scale in the world. We're inventing it. So we need to be able to practice that at a small scale. We need to be able to refine it and bring that innovation to the world. And so, as part of that equation, talent and the real estate is an important calculus. It's different than how you would run a therapeutic company, but I think one of the really important things about New York, and I can't stress this enough, and you've heard this in earlier panels, is that the magic of this city is not just a medical, right? This is certainly a unique city in terms of what you can do medically here because of the populations that are here, because of the academic medical centers that are here. But the magic of this city is that you can bring biology to other industries in a way that no other city in the world can. Right? You can bring it to the consumer, you can bring it to design, you can bring it to architecture, and it's that biology plus that differentiates New York. And to a certain extent, we're representative of that.
Yeah, and if I could just build off of that, I think that we're all very aware in this room of kind of the traditional biomedical model, and it's important. I mean, I have benefited personally a lot from healthcare, right? We all have. But if I can do one thing, it's to let you all know that there's another model, what Andras is just talking about, that is growing fast and that New York is the global center for. And it's product companies, people that are bringing biotech into something that consumers will touch, and that requires the marketing expertise of this city, the design expertise of this city, and all the other things that the city can do. So I would just hope that you all can keep that in your mind as you're building out your 5-10-year plans for the type of facilities that you want to build. Not just the IP-heavy kind of biopharma-based model, but also these very diverse interdisciplinary companies as well.
Good. Well, let's talk about something a little fun here now. So we heard, not that that's not fun. Part of the keys to the location, the talent, the expansion, the startups, was also live, work, play. So if you were to advise our real estate community here, what is the ideal live, work, play building, complex? What do you see?
From a biotech perspective, well, look, we're sitting in New York. There's plenty to do for play, right? You don't really have to get on the subway and you can probably walk. But from a biotech perspective, there is something to be said for clustering. And I remember a year ago, I just happened to be the Alexandria Center because I said I would meet somebody for coffee, and that happened to be where we had to meet. And in the 45 minutes we were there, I ran into about 4 other people that I knew. There are many names for this, scientific studies and so forth to prove that these random interactions are very, very important. But I do think that is one thing that is, I don't know how you achieve it in New York because, we have to be where we have to be in terms of lab space. But as each of the independent lab spaces that are coming online now grow, I think we're going to see that replayed over and over, and that is a really good thing because people then feel like they're part of a community. So I didn't answer your question about what fun people do for hobbies and whether you should have a daycare center on site, but I do think that the clustering in the community is very important, and it has a great feedback loop for talent.
It's almost it's a strange question. I mean, it's an incredibly important point. Everything today, if you're going to build something new, you need to build it with live, work, play in mind. New York has kind of an unfair advantage in the sense that almost anything that you do anywhere in the city, where people, where subway lines go, and you might want to develop, satisfies most of those criteria. But I would also argue that there's a lot of that happening even outside of the city. So the former Roche campus that we're on right now, there's a medical school opening. In fact, it's on Prism Capital Partners is developing this campus. It's called On3, and it's about live, work, play. They're building up a lot of residential, capacity movie theaters, gyms, et cetera. They really want this to be, to rebuild the urban density that Roche had there. At its peak, they had 10,000 people. Right now, they have 75, us, right? And they want to rebuild that density. So no longer are we in, and you guys know this all too well, we're no longer in that era where you can have like a suburban campus in the middle of nowhere because people don't want to live so much in the suburbs anymore and drive to work, and they don't want that sprawl existence. People want to live on the waterfront. They want to live in high density. They want to be able to walk to work. They want to be able to jump on a city bike, that's what they want. And whether it's relatively, New York lends itself to that very well. Brooklyn, other boroughs, Long Island City lend itself to it very well. But wherever you build, I don't think these days you can kind of build suburban sprawl anymore.
And as the hoodie-wearing millennial on the panel, I might have a unique perspective on this. But I think that my generation really doesn't see live, work, and play as separate categories, both for economic reasons and because that we're always on, always connected. That's sort of how we've grown to live. And I think especially in startups, you are told to hire your friends, right? You create a corporate culture based on the place that you want to exist and live. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, is how people's perspective on that is shifting generationally. I also want to say that places like GenSpace are places where you live, work, and play. Like you don't live at GenSpace, but you do spend a lot of time there, and you don't go there because you're like, oh, I'm gonna go raise investor dollars, and so I need to do this proof of concept at GenSpace, at least not initially. You go because you're like, what is DNA, and how can I do something cool with it, and I wanna make this bacteria glow because that sounds fun. And then you start a robot company because you're tired of pipetting. So I think that play is also crucial part of the innovation ecosystem, and making it so that people can play with biotech is a really important thing going forward.
I would actually, Janelle brought up a really good point that I was just speaking with to Alessio from CBRE, who has been our wonderful partners in real estate, if I can give them a little plug. Not to glaze over the live, work, play part, but the clustering is really super important. It's something that we've really recognized. Last week I was in San Francisco for some investor meetings, and then Boston prior to that, and realizing that we don't really have those random interactions where we run into people and we can talk about where we're at and bounce off people's experiences, because let's face it, everyone in the life science industry knows that half of the work is doing the actual science, and the other half is convincing people that it matters. And if you can't have those random interactions with the people that you want it to matter to, you're never really, it's tougher to get off the ground.
And if I might, I know we don't have much time left, but can I just say one other thing about clustering? I've been very nonchalant up here about how things are in the life sciences biotech industry in New York City. But this would have been a completely different conversation 5 years ago, and I just wanted to be explicit about that. We are in the middle of a trend. There's no question, everybody suspects a hockey stick projection, but in the last, I was making some notes on the way, and I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 biotechs that I know of off the top of my head who have raised substantial amounts of money, are doing really interesting things, have either IPO'd or are raising for their Series B right now, or we've started, or that's for them. And that was not true 5 years ago. In fact, it probably wasn't even true 3 years ago. So those are just ones from the last 3 years.
Yeah. To underscore that, Janelle, Modern Meadow is my second biotech company. Before this, I founded Organovo. 2 of the 4 founders of Organovo were New York City based back in 2008 when we started the company. We ended up getting the company going in San Diego in 2008. We looked at space in New York. It just wasn't available back in 2008. And Organovo, for those of you who don't know, was the company that pioneered the 3D printing of human tissue. It went public. At one point, it had $1 billion market cap. It employs, over 130 people in space that, Alexandria built out for it in La Jolla. If that story were to happen again, today, I would hope, and I believe, right, that that company could make a go of it today, and New York it would be one of those companies that it really lends itself to the Northeast and New York in particular.
So do we have any questions for this great panel we've had here? Thank you.
Hi. How might we be a little more gentle to the suburbs? I think it's I think it's an and question, right? It's not an or. And at some point, your labor force will be in stage 2, not just your product. And how are you going to accommodate them? I have 2 millennials who, you know,
Don't own cars.
who gave back the old Volvo station wagon we gave them, right? But they're now thinking families and education and school systems and open space, and so I don't think it's an or, right? I think it's an and I think there's lots of live, work, play opportunities in the, you know, in the, not necessarily just the suburbs, but it's the surbs, right? That's what we call them, in the edge cities, the old edge cities. So can you comment on, you know, particularly
Well,
you,
we're an
you're in that
example of
boat.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I say, you know, I'm not at all anti-suburbs. It's just that if you're going to do a new development right now, it behooves you to think of it as a cluster wherever it is, right? And on 3 campus, Roche's former headquarters, is exactly that, right? It's going to be, within the next 5 years, it's going to rebuild the density that it had. It's going to have thousands of people there. There's going to be, like, hopefully bike sharing on campus. There's going to be, you know, express transit back, you know, to the city. It's just that, and I fully agree with you that wherever it is that you're building out something, it should accommodate a diversity of lifestyles. That's the best you can hope for, because not everybody wants to live in the luxury condo, not everybody wants to live in the loft in a, you know, converted warehouse. Some people might want to have a yard, some people might want to be more exurban, right? But to be able to accommodate that diversity, and that's been a strength of New York. You know, lots of people commute in daily. And what's happening is, for the kinds of businesses that we're starting, wherever it is that you build, you should accommodate that as a cluster, and hopefully, you know, allow for a diversity of lifestyles. And if somebody wants to show up in their pajamas to work in the morning because they got out of bed and walked to work, you know, that can happen. Hopefully, not just in Manhattan. That can happen in Brooklyn and Long Island City. That can happen outside of the city in the near future.
I grew up in Palo Alto, which is a suburban place that now Google, Facebook, everybody buses people from San Francisco who are my age to Palo Alto every day, right? So I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting transitions in terms of where people want to live and how they get to work.
I mean, we're thinking about it the same way you're thinking about it too. It may have just sounded, the way that it come off the framework was a little bit and/or, but it was real. It really is something that we are considering. So if, you know, we can get amazing space near Penn Station where people from New Jersey and upstate can get to, investors visiting from out of town can get to us from the airport quickly. I mean, those are all very big wins for us if we can get locality that is reachable and accessible by many different areas.
All right, thank you very much.